4 years ago, the Russian papers finally broke the scandalous story of Russia's own kidnapped sex slaves and their own babies born in captivity. The police broke into a 2-meter by 3-meter cellar that had been specially constructed underneath a garage in a garden. Now, the girls have decided to tell their disturbing story. Their intelligence and their honesty throw an extraordinary light upon these crimes.
Ну, он меня, конечно, напугал. Но все равно, я вот сейчас понимаю, я анализирую то, что происходило, и я понимаю, что он сам очень боялся.
That frightened but guilty man was Viktor Mokhova. 53 years old, he'd lived in the town of Skopin since he was a child, and at the time of the crime was still living there, in a house he shared with his mother.
I don't understand why he did something so stupid. Why? He was a good man. He'd been a party member in communist times, you know. Oh, Lord. He graduated from college. He was an educated man. How could he do such a stupid thing? He doesn't even smoke.
No one seemed to know or understand how Viktor Mokhova could have committed the crime. He worked at the local car factory, and his workmates were shocked at his arrest.
When we heard about it, we didn't really believe it. And it wasn't like him at all. We still don't believe it, really.
As far as work is concerned, I can't say anything bad about him. He had golden hands. Is he guilty? Sure he's guilty. But knowing his best side, it's so hard to believe.
Even the local police found it hard to believe that Mokhova could be guilty of such a crime.
Mokhova had medals from Soviet times. He was a hero of communist labor. He had lots of these kinds of medals. Nobody would have suspected that Mokhova was capable of such a crime. No one in the local police thought he was the kind of man who'd keep people in the basement, rape them and humiliate them, or endanger their lives.
But this ex-Communist Party member, whom no one suspected, succeeded in constructing his own personal dungeon and in kidnapping 2 girls, aged only 14 and 17, whom he used as his sexual slaves for nearly 4 years.
Это уже там было в подвале. Ну, в общем, произошло изнасилование. Произошло изнасилование, и как вначале ее, потом меня. Дальше было страшнее. Дальше все было гораздо страшнее. Дальше начался кошмар, который продолжался более 3,5 лет. Почти 4 года.
Dieser Mann hat aber in der Zwischenzeit.
When news of the Joseph Fritzl case broke, men and women all over the world watched as the horrifying story unfolded. In Russia, 2 young women watched the news with perhaps greater understanding. Katya Martynova and Lena Simachina know very well what it's like to be kidnapped and held hostage. They'd been kept as sexual slaves in underground captivity for nearly 4 years. The man who had kidnapped the 2 girls was a 53-year-old factory worker called Viktor Mokhova, who at the time of the crime still lived with his mother and had a poor track record of relationships with women.
He was afraid of them, afraid of women. He wasn't much of a chatter-upper. And if they did go out with him, they'd just dump him.
To solve this problem, Mokhova chose a monstrous solution. Despite the watchful eyes of his neighbours, he excavated a cellar beneath the garage in his garden. Made of reinforced steel and concrete, The cellar had a hidden entrance, 2.5 floors and massive locked doors. On the lowest level was a room 2 meters by 3, in which there was a double bunk bed, shelves, a cooker, a wash basin and a television. All he needed now was to capture the specimens that he would keep here. Images of the cellar in the Fritzl house stir painful memories for Katya and Lena.
This is so scary. No one can ever feel safe, ever. We live in a world where even our closest neighbors can turn out to be like that. It's so frightening.
Men with problems like Viktor's are, it seems, not exactly rare. And while few may be so sexually inadequate as to seek Viktor's solution, the fear is that Katya and Lena's experience is just part of a hidden crime wave. There may be hundreds, if not thousands of young women now being held in horrifying captivity while overworked police forces give up on the long-term missing.
I am 100% sure there are other people in the same situation, in cellars just like ours. Not only in Russia, but also in other countries as well. And it's frightening. It's frightening watching stories like this on television, because they seem to be happening more and more often.
Katya and Lena's horrific story began in September of 2000, when the no longer communist city of Ryazan marked the Orthodox religious festival of faith, hope and love with a rather more secular celebration, a huge street party and open-air disco. It was going to be the event of the year.
It was my first ever disco in Ryazan. I'd never been anywhere before that. I was so small. And we've been talking about it for a month, about going to this event.
I am Katya's sister. There was a street party and disco in the town and I was supposed to go with Katya. But I went without her on my own. And so I asked a girlfriend of mine called Lena if she would take her.
Apparently Katya wanted to go. So I phoned her and we decided to go there together, as we did know each other and we didn't have anyone else to go with.
So the 14-year-old Katya, in the care of her sister's 17-year-old friend Lena, went out to enjoy the public holiday.
Anyway, when Lena and I decided to go home, lots of other people were going too. With so many people around, the public transport was a nightmare. It was just impossible to get a bus or a tram, and there were no minibuses then.
A car stopped right next to us. Even though we didn't have our thumbs up, we were waiting for a bus, not hitchhiking.
When he stopped, he said, "Girls, let me give you a lift. You'll never make it on your own. It's quite late now." The guy behind the wheel was just a normal guy. Nothing suspicious about him. No hint that he could be a maniac or something. Just an ordinary middle-aged guy.
So we just got in the car and off we went.
Catching a lift from a stranger is more understandable in Russia. For many years, car owners in the Soviet Union felt obliged to offer lifts, and it was the ordinary way of getting about town, perfectly safe and perfectly normal. But in this case, it would turn out to be anything but safe and anything but normal.
As we were driving, he offered us a drink of vodka to celebrate the holiday.
Katya and I looked at each other and we thought, because we were almost home, it would be okay to accept. And he was driving. It would be better not to upset him.
I think I had the drink because I wanted to feel grown up. I was with an older friend. And I was just the kid there. I wanted to be like her.
I think we were driving a very long time. But I lost my sense of time and space. I don't know how to explain it.
It shouldn't have taken more than half an hour for the girls to get home. But in fact, Viktor Mokhov had laced the alcohol with phenazepam, so that they never really noticed they'd been driving for more than 90 kilometers. At the end of the journey, they pulled onto a private road.
Вот здесь мне стало страшно. И тут я поняла, что уже что-то произошло. Потому что я пыталась... У меня было ощущение, что что-то должно произойти настолько страшное, что непоправимо страшное. Позвал Лену, то есть они вышли, и я осталась одна. Через какое-то время Лена приходит и говорит, вот, Катя, там, они нас привезли сюда, чтобы изнасиловать нас. В тот момент у меня, то есть я не верила, то, что я, то есть была девочкой, то есть у меня никогда не было никаких связей. Я не знала, что это такое, и я вообще не понимала, что это такое возможно. То есть я думала, что они сейчас, то есть так шутят они с нами. Вот. Потом он меня, то есть, отвел в гараж и сказал, чтобы я разделась. Произошло изнасилование. Произошло изнасилование, и как вначале ее, потом меня. Дальше было страшнее. Дальше все было гораздо страшнее. Дальше начался кошмар, который продолжался более 3,5 лет. Почти 4 года. Моkhov меня изнасиловал и отвел, то есть, в этот подвал. Он меня там закрыл, я осталась одна. Сейчас. Я, конечно, начала плакать. Кати не было. Я спускалась туда, чтобы забрать Катю. На самом деле забрать ее. Она спала, она была в невменяемом состоянии. Вообще. Я не могла ее одеть. Пока я ее одевала, все двери закрылись. Их было там 3. И все.
Back in Ryazan, as the next day broke, the girls' families were beginning to realize that something had gone horribly wrong.
It was Sunday, and the girls hadn't come back, and we went to the police, and there we formally reported them missing.
When it became clear that the girls hadn't returned next day, it became probable that some kind of crime had occurred. But we had to establish what kind of crime it was exactly.
We imagined all sorts of things, but not the very worst. There was still hope. We tried to imagine every possible situation, but I don't think we thought the worst. We just didn't want to think the worst.
Normally, when girls are kidnapped for sex, well, they normally end up getting killed. And even more so in this case, because one of the girls was only 14, and criminals know very well the consequences of that kind of crime. In prison, they know they'll be hated by all the other prisoners, so to cover it up, they usually end up killing their victims.
The police told us all sorts of awful stories. They said that in 99% of all cases like this, the children never come home alive. They said it wasn't worth our going to anyone for help. They said it was hopeless, really.
For the family, the nightmare of not knowing would go on. But for Katya and Lena themselves, the nightmare was all too real, and only just beginning.
I
had the keys of my flat with me, and we used them to scratch on the wall, to scratch the dates on the walls of the cellar. So we got there on September the 30th. Then it was October 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. That was the last date we bothered to put on the wall.
After Mokhov was arrested and the girls released, the grubby details of his plans and of what the girls had gone through became clear.
All these things belong to Mokhov. These were for the girls. He'd look at these like instructions, and then, well... And he loved to look at pictures of women's underwear. During his interrogation, he tried to tell us that he was choosing something for the girls, what knickers to buy them, but actually, he was obsessed with it. The whole of the first section of his cellar was covered with sexual posters.
It was this small area, this first section, just outside the main cellar room, which Mokhov had planned as the space where he would have sex with his victims.
These are his little proverbs, which describe his ideas about sex. Older animals, like dogs and cats, are rejuvenated by having sex with younger ones, and that's true for humans too.
The real question was how he would force the girls individually to leave the relative safety of the cellar room and join him in his sexual laboratory.
We weren't that frightened of his threats of violence. We didn't think he'd be able to kill us with his bare hands. But he said he could starve us to death. Just leave us for 10 days, come back and find 2 corpses. And when you're desperate for food and water, you'll do anything.
The truth of how Mokhov manipulated his victims was discovered when the police rescued them in 2004. The evidence of the girls vividly described the torments they had both endured.
To get sex, he always had to threaten us. He said if neither Lena nor I would go with him, He would switch off the light and block the ventilation. So we had to go and be with him. That's how it happened. Later it became like a duty. He gave us light and food, and we had sex with him.
The sex took place in the small area next to the main cellar room, in which the girls were forced to live. That had bunk beds, a television, a basin, and a cooking ring. The toilet facilities were simply a bucket with a lid. Like hostages anywhere, time was the enemy.
Everything started to seem the same. After about 18 months, even the way we thought. To start with, things were new things each day, and then they just weren't. It just became routine.
I tried to keep busy by reading. I found a teach yourself English book there because he brought us some books to use as toilet paper. I started learning English from that book. Plus, he brought us some magazines, and they had crosswords, which kept me busy. And then later, I began to make up crosswords myself.
Most notably, Katya started making a whole series of paintings. These paintings offer an extraordinary insight into her state of mind. Trevor Turner is a consultant psychiatrist who's often worked with people who've been through traumatic experiences.
Katya's paintings are extraordinarily good. They're sexual, but they're not, in my view, pornographic. The pictures that she's drawing are best equated to the kind of pictures children draw after they've been abused. Her paintings have a certain formality, but I mean, there's little emotion there. You can see that there's a sense of ritual being performed rather than an actual emotional experience. There she is, simply taking on the standard postures, positions that are sexual and painting them in a way that makes sense to her. And one wonders why she did it.
Lots of people think when they look at my pictures of half-naked girls, they think, what else could she draw being in such a situation? But I wasn't drawing those pictures just because of that. It wasn't just because that was what my life was like. Maybe I wanted to say that a naked body isn't always about violent sex. I mean, I was drawing windows and nature because I wanted to see them. And maybe I was drawing men and women with some warm relationship between them, with love, because I wanted to see that too.
In fact, Katya, at 14, was so traumatized by the experience that she never ever reached full puberty, despite being held for nearly 4 years. Lena, on the other hand, was older, and the consequences of the repeated rapes were inevitable.
I
was so scared of getting pregnant from the very beginning, because he wasn't taking any precautions. I asked him, I begged him to use condoms or put me on the pill, just to do something to prevent it. But he absolutely refused. In the end, of course, it happened. And more than once.
When Lena got pregnant the first time, I was sure it was our chance to escape. There was no way for her to give birth in the cellar. I was sure of it.
I was alone. I had no medical assistance, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't normal. I didn't know anything.
He brought us a book on childbirth, some manual for medical students. He told me to study it carefully, and he told Lena, "This is your nurse, she'll help." In fact, the baby was born very quickly. I didn't even need to help her.
After I gave birth to a little boy, I don't know if Katya remembers this, but she said, "He's pretty." And I said, "No, no, for heaven's sake, take him away. Don't show him to me."
In fact, Mokhov took the baby away almost immediately. But before long, Lena fell pregnant again, and this time she kept the child. But after 4 months in the cellar, the little boy became very ill. And oddly, that perhaps presented a real chance to escape. They asked Mokhov to take the boy to a doctor, but before he did, they hid little written messages inside the baby's clothing.
We thought Mokhov might find one of the messages, but not all of them. Anyway, he came and took the baby, and the next day he came back and said, "I'm not that much of a fool. I didn't give him away in the same clothes you put him in." So obviously he changed the baby's clothes before he left him anywhere.
Mokhov didn't take the baby to hospital, but as he had with the first child, he simply dumped the boy on the doorstep of a house in Skopin. After the girls were rescued, Lena discovered that the babies she gave birth to had already been adopted.
I did want to get them back, actually. But unfortunately, I still don't know exactly where they are. I can't say I never think about it. Of course I do. But really, I just think it's fate. It's fate.
But back in the spring of 2003, when Mokhov had taken away the second child, Lena and Katya had already been living in his cellar for more than 2 years. They knew that in order to be rescued, they would have, somehow or another, to smuggle out the information of where they were. But to do that, they needed Mokhov to drop his guard.
We had a plan. We'd try to make him believe that we weren't going to resist him anymore. The idea was to make him relax, and we could use that.
I tried to convince him that I wouldn't do anything to fight him, to show him that I knew he was stronger than me.
Katya did manage, over time, to change his attitude. She managed to make him... Well, by the end, he began to trust her a little bit.
He first allowed me out after 2.5 years. It was spring. To start with, he didn't actually let me out, but he let me look out of the metal panel door. So I wasn't standing outside. I was still inside, but I was at least seeing outside.
As time passed, Katya was allowed out more often, and finally, their plans began to pay off. Mokhov, it seems, wanted either to enslave or simply to rape another girl, one who happened to be renting a room in his house. He felt confident enough to ask Katya to help him by going with him to the girl's room and by pretending to be his niece.
Lena and I, we realized immediately that this was our chance. This was a real chance to get out. We wrote a note. It had to be small, but at the same time it had to contain lots of information. First of all, we put our names, our addresses, where we are now, and when we went missing, and asked for her help.
Katya went with Mokhov to the girl's room, and when he wasn't looking, she did manage to pass on the note. The girl contacted the police.
The girl said that sometimes, in the evening or sometimes late at night, she had seen how the man would go down to the garden, to the garage or a cellar beneath it, near the house, and she'd seen him bring one or two girls up from there.
It didn't take the police long to check the names on Katya's note and see that they were the two girls who'd been kidnapped in Ryazan 4 years before. On the 4th of May 2004, Katya and Lena were finally discovered by the police. The end of their nightmare was at hand. The entire rescue was filmed by the police as it happened.
Девчонки, вы живы там? Скоро, скоро. Потерпите чуть-чуть. Так, подожди лестницу. Так, пока не вылазит никому, девчата.
Не надо нас фотографировать.
Тихо, 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 тихо.
The first thing the police had to do was to check that the two girls really were the same two girls who'd been kidnapped 4 years before.
Тебя как зовут?
Ща.
Так, побери кого-то из вас.
Мартынова Екатерина Валерьевна. Адрес.
Да-да, обязательно. Я переживал.
Энгельс 8.
It wasn't until later that evening that the police phoned the parents to tell them that the girls had finally been found.
5:30 звонок по телефону. Она говорит, девочки нашлись. И молчит. И я молчу. Потом я уже собираюсь и спрашиваю. И первый мой вопрос был, конечно, какой. Я говорю, мертвые? Она говорит, нет, живые. Было очень страшно очень увидеть. Она такая маленькая ушла, ей 14 лет только, маленькая, хрупенькая такая. Думаю, за 4 года она и выросла, и совсем другая стала. И когда выходила, я только увидела ее. Она идет, альбом обняла, домик на руке вот это несет, в той же черной кофточке, в той же черной юбочке. У меня голос пропал. Я обняла. И я слышу только на ухо, мне шепчет Катя, мама, пожалуйста, не плачь. Я говорю, почему, дочка? Она говорит, столько слез было пролито. Я, говорит, не хочу больше. Я говорю, хорошо, дочка, не буду.
Lena's mother had kept a faithful vigil for 4 years, but has recently fallen seriously ill and isn't able to tell her side of this story.
When my parents got there, my mum ran to me and I ran to her. Well, as much as I could, of course. I could hardly walk, actually. I think I still had bedroom slippers on. We had a long hug and lots of tears. And ever since then, I've celebrated the 4th of May as my second birthday. My parents gave me this ring for my first second birthday. It's a gold ring.
Viktor Mokhov was put on trial, and he tried to portray himself in the best possible light.
I was standing with Alexandra, Lena's mother, and the girls were hiding behind us. They didn't want to see him and didn't want him to see them. But in court, when he was given his say and he started addressing the girls, he started trying to prove how well he had treated them. Katya, didn't I feed you? Didn't I bring you strawberries? Didn't I bring you cake? Can you imagine the parents were there and he said that? I was thinking, who asked you to feed them? Nobody asked you to feed them. We'd have done it perfectly well without you, and raised them without you, thank you very much.
The court was unimpressed, and Viktor Mokhov was sentenced to 17 years imprisonment in Siberia. Now, 4 years after they were rescued, the girls have decided to return to Skopin and to the scene of the crime, to show us where they were incarcerated. It'll be the first time they've been here since the day they were discovered and rescued.
Ой, какой кошмар. Я даже не помню. Я помню, здесь стояли с милицией. С милицией, я помню, здесь стояли. Туда надо спускаться, точно. Ой.
But going down to the cellar will mean confronting their worst nightmares. Because it was here that the two girls were subjected to a reign of sexual terror that lasted 3 years, 8 months, and 4 days.
Звуки. Ой, я даже сюда не влезу, мне кажется.
Зато лестница будет короткая, да?
Даже не верится, что я здесь стою. То есть раньше, когда дома думала, не было вот так страшно. Сейчас вот стою, то есть у меня настолько хочется отсюда уйти, то есть всего этого не видеть, тем более, что там внутри. Не знаю, это очень тяжело. Ой, какой страх вообще.
Ой, ужас какой.
Ой, ужас.
А там внизу видно что-нибудь?
Ничего не видно.
А вот дверь открыта видно. Да, хотя фонарь все-таки светит, он вот видно светит. Вот видишь, 2 кружочка светит.
Смотри. Мы там чуть и голос себе не сорвали. Но нас, естественно, не слышно. Ой, потому что там шумоизоляция вообще капитальная. Ай-яй! Ой, фу, господи, какая гадость!
Смотри.
Ой, какая маленькая.
Смотри.
Да.
Что это наша вещь? Что-то лифчик. Не знаю, мой туфель стоит.
Ничего не помню. Вообще ничего не помню. Встать-то.
Я вот эту, например, не узнаю.
Мадонну, я помню.
Не было.
Была.
Была?
Краски мои. Персонажа нашего самого, в принципе, популярного, можно так сказать, мультфильма российского «Ну, погоди». Волк, заяц. Была просто белая стена. Нужно было ее как-то преобразить. Не знаю, почему я этот рисунок выбрала.
Да, холод здесь жуткий. Вот так вот бывало иногда холодно, когда дня 2-3 не было вентиляции и света. Ну, то есть тут была темнота, холод и все. И конец света.
Там настолько все.
So many things have changed there. Either that or we've forgotten a lot. Seems like a different place.
It's so much smaller. It's not the same at all. I didn't have any of the feelings I was expecting to have.
Да, на самом деле, я очень
Yes, she's right. To start with, I was afraid to climb down there. I was frightened that it would be full of bad memories. But I went down there and stood there, and I have no bad feelings at all.
никаких эмоций совсем. Очень рада.
I'm really glad I did it. We both are. My mood has completely changed.
For Lena and Katya, everything has changed. Since their release, both of them have got married, and they're pursuing their careers. They were offered psychological help to overcome the trauma of 4 years incarceration and slavery, but they have, very largely, rejected it.
I did go to a psychiatrist once, and some young guy prescribed me some sleeping pills. That's when my visits to the psychologists ended.
I did have one meeting with a psychologist, and after that I said no to such help. We were offered it and it was free, but I refused.
I can't say I'm a victim of this. I didn't feel like that, even when I really was a victim. You should never say you're a victim. You should never allow yourself to be a victim. Oh, I'm a victim. No, you don't have to be a victim. And I don't want to be one.
Now I feel, in a way, it was like it happened to someone else. And when I remember it, I feel sorry for that little girl and for what happened to her. I don't feel sorry for myself, but for that Katya, who was there. I've always believed in myself, and it was that belief that's helped me. I knew that in a year, or maybe 2, I'd be an ordinary, normal person again.
The extraordinary thing about these two girls is the way they've got themselves back to normality in terms of relationships, memories, and what they're doing with themselves. How have they done that? I would suggest they've done their own kind of what we call cognitive therapy. They've been through it, put it in its place, moved on. And they've done it by their own force of character in putting things behind them and generating a new world to live in. And maybe we should learn from them as to how they've done that.
Whatever awful things happen in life, you have to move on. Otherwise life is just pointless. We don't live for the bad times, but for the good times that life gives us. So, we need to live, learn, work, rest, and do whatever life lets us do. Otherwise we don't live, we just exist. And I don't want to just exist. I want to live.